Hello everyone, today we're going to be going more in depth in terms of the calcium uses and functions rather than absorption. So if you haven't yet watched my video on calcium absorption and vitamin D, because that links in with calcium, then I suggest you better start there before moving on to all of the functions instead. Down here I've got this diagram that just illustrates that only about 25 to 35% of all calcium is absorbed. I won't be going into detail with this diagram as it explains it quite well, so you can pause this video and have a look at the diagram itself. But only about 25 to 35% gets absorbed. Calcium gets built into the bone tissue and it makes up both the compact bone, which is the outer shell, the hard stuff, and the spongy bone, which is the bone and the structural inside that makes sure that you can either increase or decrease in bone density. And the more bone density, or the bigger the bone density you have, the stronger your bones are, which is what we want to achieve in order to, prevent osteoporosis. For more information about preventing osteoporosis and osteoporosis in general, I also have another video which will be linked at the very end of the video, but there it also describes how the peak bone mass and the bone mass decreases as you age, but also depending on which sort of gender you are, whether you're a male or you're a female. When the body notices an elevated level of calcium in the bloodstream, it triggers a response in the thyroid glands. The thyroid glands are what are sitting right here, right below, actually attached to your windpipe. The thyroid gland releases something called calcitonin, which in turn goes in and tells the bones not to release any more calcium from them. But it also tells the kidneys that they need to excrete more calcium via the urine. When the body registers that the calcium level in the blood is too low, the body also needs to respond. Calcium is useful for all organisms and all organs inside of our body, so we don't want too much, but we also don't want too little. Instead of the thyroid gland now working towards getting the calcium level back to normal, it is now the work of the parathyroid gland. So a way to remember this is the thyroid gland, which sits here on the windpipe, is in charge of increasing the calcium levels in the blood. The parathyroid gland, which sits just at the top, like you would see at the kidneys, it's a little addition, that works to increase the calcium level in the blood. So the way that the parathyroid gland increases the calcium level in the blood is by activating a parathyroid hormone called PTH, if you shorten it. What PTH does is the three amazing things. The first one is that it goes in and it tells the bones to release more calcium into the bloodstream. Number two is that they tell the kidneys to stop excreting as much calcium as they normally do, but rather that they should retain some of the calcium. So instead of excreting 160 milligrams, they might only excrete 80. So they filter them out, but it retains it back in, so less calcium is excreted in the urine. The third and final thing that PTH does, which is amazing, is that it inadvertently increases the synthesis of type 1.25 hydroxy vitamin D, which is a paramount component in the transcellular absorption of calcium, specifically in the small intestine at the very beginning, called duodenum. Calcium also has a major function in the way of leading nerve impulses. So I've put a diagram down here. But when calcium comes in its ionic form, Ca2+, the nerve impulses reaches it and they together form these synaptic vesicles. These then go down to the edge of the synapse, and then they get carried over the synaptic cleft, and then they get carried over to the target cells. Without this, we wouldn't be able to send out nerve impulses, and we essentially wouldn't be able to control our arms or our fingers or do these kind of weird things. When we combine the nerve impulses and the muscular contractions, you will see that when you look at the neuromuscular synapse, we have these nerve impulses, also known as the vesicles that I talked about earlier. We also call them action potential. These will get led down through over the cell membrane and through this thing we call a T-tube. The action potential then needs to go through this T-tube and then through it, which is the cell membrane, in through to something called the sarcoplasmatic reticulum. And in this space, the sarcoplasmatic reticulum, we store calcium. When the action potential goes through the T-tube, also known alongside as the cell membrane, it triggers the response of calcium being released between the myofilaments, which is what triggers the action potential, and muscular contraction, which I'll talk about right after this, but it involves myosin. And then this creates this circular motion of then calcium is released between the myofilaments, and then it goes out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and then it goes back into the sarcoplasmatic reticulum. So it creates this circle of just calcium going round and round and round, as long as action potentials going through the T-tube. Calcium plays a massive role in muscular contractions because it helps create this whole sliding filament mechanism. What calcium does is that it goes in and it binds itself to the regulating protein and tropin myosin. When calcium attaches itself to the regulating protein, the myosin binding spot gets exposed. If myosin binds itself and there's ATP there, then the whole nodding motion of the myosin will occur, and then the sliding filament mechanism will occur, and thereby a muscular contraction will be there. If there's no ATP, then the muscular contraction will not happen. But if calcium never even existed and never wasn't even present in the regulating protein, the binding spots for myosin would never even be exposed, and the possibility of having a muscular contraction would be non-existent. Apart from all that, calcium also helps in blood coagulation, which is where you get a cut and then some blood comes over, essentially in very simple terms, comes over and helps stops the bleeding. But that is all of the functions for calcium, and I really hope that cleared up some things. I know it's difficult to understand and get straight away, but the more you practice, the better you become. And sometimes things are just not easy, especially not with calcium, but it is amazing what it can do. Thank you so much. If you've got any questions, just leave them down below and I'll try my best to answer them. Bye bye.